Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachadi. Jamuna Tira Vanachadi. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachadi. Yamuna Tira Vanachadi. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivijakacharya Asta Saraswati Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaura Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 4. And I guess we're going to read verse 44. Yes? Okay. Pritoham te prajanata yattesyo brimhanam tapaha Maimasha Kamabhutanam Yadbhoryasur Vibhotayah Britoham Te Prajanata Yattesyo Brimhanam Tapaha Mamaisha Kamabhutanam Yadbhoryasur Vibhotayah. Ladies? Pritaha, very much pleased. Aham, I, te, with you. Prajanata, O king of population. Yat, because. Te, your. Asya, of this material world. Udbrimhanam, causing increase. Tapaha, austerity. Mama, my. Esha, this. Kamaha, desire. Bhutanam, of the living entities. Yat, which. Bhuyasahu, may there be. Vibhotayaha, advancement in all respects. Translation: My dear Prajapati Daksha, you have performed extreme austerities for the welfare and growth of the world. My desire also is that everyone within this world be happy. I am therefore very pleased with you because you're endeavoring to fulfill my desire for the welfare of the entire world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. After every dissolution of the material cosmos, all the living entities take shelter in the body of Karnadaksha Vishnu, where and when creation takes place again, they come forth from his body in their various species to resume their activities. Why does the creation take place in such a way that the living entities are put into conditioned life to suffer the threefold miseries imposed upon them by the material nature? Good question. Here the Lord says to Daksha, you desire to benefit all living entities, and that is also my desire. The living entities who come in contact with the material world are meant to be corrected. All the living entities within this material world have revolted against the service of the Lord, and therefore they remain within this material world as ever-conditioned Nityabadha, taking birth again and again. There is a chance, of course, of their being liberated, but nevertheless, the conditioned souls not taking advantage of this opportunity continue in a life of sense enjoyment, and thus they are punished by birth and death again and again. This is the law of nature, as the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Daivi yesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mameva ye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. This divine energy of mind consisting of the three modes of material nature is difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it elsewhere. Bhagavad Gita 15:7. Mamivangsa jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha manakshastani indriyani prakriti stani karshati. The living entities in the conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they're struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. The living entity's struggle for existence within the material world is due to his rebellious nature. Unless a living entity surrenders to Krishna, he must continue this life of struggle. Paragraph. The Krishna consciousness movement is not a fad. It is a bona fide movement intended to promote the welfare of all conditioned souls by trying to elevate everyone to the platform of Krishna consciousness. If one does not come to this platform, he must continue in material existence perpetually, sometimes in the upper planets and sometimes in the lower planets, as confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Kabhu svarge utaya, kabhu narake dubhaya. The conditioned soul sometimes descends into nescience and sometimes gets relief by being relatively freed from it. This is the life of the conditioned soul. Prajapati Daksha is trying to benefit the conditioned souls by begetting them to give them a life with a chance for liberation. Liberation means surrender to Krishna. If one begets a child with the purpose of training them to surrender to Krishna, fatherhood is very good. Similarly, when the spiritual master trains the conditioned souls to become Krishna conscious, his position is successful. If one gives the conditioned souls a chance to become Krishna conscious, all his activities are approved by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is extremely pleased, as stated here, Pritoham. Following the example of the previous acharyas, all the members of the Krishna consciousness movement should tried to benefit the conditioned souls by inducing them to become Krishna conscious and giving them all facilities to do so. Such activities constitute real welfare work. By such activities, a preacher or anyone who endeavors to spread Krishna consciousness is recognized by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As the Lord himself confirms in Bhagavad Gita 1868 through 69, Yaidam paramam guyam mad bhakteshu abhidasyati bhaktim mayi param kritva mam evaishyati asamshayaha nachatasmat manusheshu kaschin me priyakritamaha bhavata na chame tasmat anya priyataro bhuvi. For one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, devotional service is guaranteed, and at the end he will come back to me. There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. In this verse, in the last line, Vibhu Tasya. Vibhu Tasya is desiring, indicating Bhuya Suhu is the desire for everyone's advancement. In the next verse, this similar root, the same word as vibhuti, is found, and the purport dives further into the vibhuti part. But this vibhuti, what's a vibhuti? It's an opulence. It's an opulence of the Supreme Lord, representing Him in this world. That's what a vibhuti is. Of sharks, of fish I'm sharks, of this I'm that. Vibhutis are the superlative feature of something that's of the spiritual world, manifested in a superlative feature in this world. Amongst many, there's a superlative, and that superlative is a vibhuti. And there's no limit to the vibhutis, because the Lord is unlimited. And therefore he concludes that section with but a spark of my splendor I maintain and support the whole universe. That's his Paramatma feature. He maintains and supports the entire creation with but a spark of his splendor. As I'm speaking, I just want to share something with you. A question came up. Somebody heard in a class that Paramatma exists in Vaikuntha. I don't see anybody's head jumping up because we don't normally hear that, right? Paramatma is in Vaikuntha. And when that speaker was questioned, what's the scriptural basis for that statement? The statement was, Jiva Goswami makes this statement in Paramatma Sundarbha. Well, I was taken aback. So I read the first verse of Paramatma Sundarbha where it says, although in Vaikuntha the Lord is manifest as Paramatma, then the rest of it is what the normal way that we think of Paramatma. So it could be read that Jiva Goswami is saying that in Vaikuntha there's Paramatma. So I consulted Radhikaraman, who many of you know. He's a Sanskritist and a PhD from Oxford University, who did his PhD on some verses from Paramatma Sandarbha. So he was a good go-to person for that question. And the conclusion, it was a nice exchange. And his explanation goes like this. There are different ways of understanding what the meaning of Paramatma is. Literally, Paramatma means the Supreme Soul, Paramatma. So in this particular verse, Jiva Goswami is making a statement, although in Vaikuntha, the Lord is present as the Supreme Soul. So meanings are to be understood according to context. And the conventional meaning that we're accustomed to, Brahmeti, Paramatmiti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdyate, Paramatma means the angsa. I'm using this reference because Vibhuti is also, it's a type of expansion in this world of the Supreme Lord. In the spiritual world, the Lord exists as Bhagavan. And Bhagavan, in this case, is synonymous with Paramatma, or Paramatma is synonymous with Bhagavan, in this case, in this particular context. And the rest of Paramatma Sandarbha is describing the Paramatma that we all know, the one who oversees Prakriti, Maya Jakshena Prakriti, etc. Upadrashta Anamanta Cha. He oversees and permits. He is he is the one that gives direction to the modes of nature. In the modes of nature, condition living entities, but he's the director. And there are many functions that Paramatma in this material world performs. So is there a Paramatma like that in the hearts of jivas in the spiritual world? The answer is no. He exists as Narayana in the spiritual world, as the Bhagavan feature of the Absolute Truth in Vaikuntha. And as such, he's the Paramatma. He's the Supreme Soul. So this a little, one has to be careful when reading and then understanding what one is reading. But the person who spoke this, that there's Paramatma in Vaikuntha, is also very knowledgeable in Sanskrit. So my reason for bringing this up is be careful. And if you hear something that sounds left field, like that's really strange, then it's quite okay to seek clarity. Like Arjun, Krishna, here you say this and there you say that. I'm confused. Seek clarity. Similar to the evening discussion about Brahma's inquisitiveness. What's the limit of the opulences of Krishna? Being inquisitive is just fine. Having some, even having some doubts, just fine. Then what do you do with that? That's where it leads to elevation or it leads to degradation, where you repose that questioning spirit. We're getting this picture in the verse for this morning that Daksha's desire matches Krishna's desire, or Lord Vishnu's desire. What's Vishnu's desire? He desires happiness for all living beings. It's in slow motion. It's described in Brahma Samhita, and further described in the second and third cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. Here we are at the sixth canto. Same thing. What's the same thing? The Lord has a desire, Icha. And what's that desire? He wants happiness. The circumstance in the process of creation, which is something that is being mentioned in this purport, in the process of creation, during the cosmic annihilation, at the end of the life of Brahma, all living entities are withdrawn from the creation because the time energy plug is pulled. And when time energy stops acting, everything collapses. It folds back again from subtle to gross and gross, gross to subtle to subtle to subtle to subtle energies, and the living entities are put to sleep, in deep sleep, susupti, within the body of Mahavishnu. And through passage of time, it's his time, not like he has an alarm clock and the alarm clock goes off. It's just, it's time for creation, and he has a desire. What's the desire? These living entities that are asleep in the susupti state, I wish that they were happy. I wish that they would experience the limit of happiness that's possible for living entities. It's a compassionate desire. That's all he does. And Rama Devi, who is his internal potency, she knows her Lord and Master's desire, his Icha, and so she makes an arrangement for those living entities, along with an expansion of her time energy under her direction, to be entrusted to the glance of Mahavishnu that carries the living entities in the time energy to Pradhan. And the primordial impregnation takes place. The glance of Mahavishnu, identified by the name Shambhu, contacts Pradhan. And then so many other things start to happen. But the prompt is the Lord's desire, Icha. And the desire is the happiness of the living entities. But they're not experiencing that when they're in susupti state. So what about when the cosmic manifestation takes place? There's this classic question. God is all good, God is all great. Why did he make a place where people suffer? Why did he permit wars and people doing bad stuff and suffering of so many descriptions? Why? And if you're an atheist, then you say, there is no God. Or if you're, there's different responses that are not theistic. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do innocent children have to suffer? And all those, so many questions. Then, so what's the purpose of creation? The purpose of creation, the underneath the creation, is a desire that living entities should become happy. However, problema. What's that? They're rebellious. They want happiness in another way. What's the other way? Becoming the enjoyer of Prakriti, independent of their master, their superior, their loving object. They want another happiness. That's a problem, because there is no happiness over there. And so there's lessons to learn, both external and internal. There's lessons to learn. There's no happiness there. Unfortunately, due to stubborn obstinacy, Prabhupada sometimes uses the phrase dog obstinacy. I think of donkey obstinate. Donkeys are more obstinate than dogs. When donkeys don't want to go somewhere, they won't go. They're dug in and they're not going to move. Anyway, stubborn obstinacy, they can't let go. And let go of specifically the aspiration, the itcha, the desire, the intention to be an enjoyer of sense objects through their senses. And so the varieties of species are there to fulfill that. And built into the whole system, ultimately built into the whole system, is to give living entities an opportunity by evolutionary process to come to the stage where they have the human form of life, and in the human form of life, they can go beyond that mistake, primordial mistake, the original ignorance. The mother ignorance is the ignorance of all ignorances, and that's ignoring the Supreme. That's Vishnu's desire for creation, that living entities can become happy. It's an arduous path, and there's an elevator method, and there's a stairway method, but it's elevation of consciousness beyond that mistake of thinking oneself the enjoyer of Prakriti. It's not easy to let go of that, but that's the requirement. That's the facility of the human form of life, to go beyond that mistake, correct the mistake, and put in place the original consciousness, or awaken the original consciousness. So that's Vishnu's desire, and Prajapati Daksha is being recognized by Vishnu, because it's Vishnu who's speaking to him. You have understood my desire. And your desire is to follow my desire. He's giving him a lot of credit. Because somebody that's a Prajapati isn't necessarily desiring the Supreme Lord's happiness. Vishnu is giving Prajapati credit for having understood Vishnu's desire, aligning his desire with Vishnu's desire, undergoing long and great austerities to attain that position where he can produce living entities that attain happiness. So that Daksha's ability to do that, circling back to this word vibhuti. That's a vibhuti. It's going to come up in the next verse also. One can't do that. Prajapati Daksha can't do that, or anyone other than the Supreme Lord can't do that without the empowerment of the Supreme Lord to do that, to deliver one to the position of real happiness. Or, in the language of Bhagavad Gita, the language of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tara Pravartana. In order for someone to awaken another person's bhakti, it requires direct empowerment. Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tara Pravartana. It requires Krishna Shakti, it requires Krishna's empowerment. Here's a little Prabhupada story. Some of you have been to Mayapur. Anyone not been to Mayapur? Okay, one. In Mayapur, supposing you're looking at the front gate of the Mayapur temple, and there's a long walkway that leads to the temple. But supposing just looking at the front gate, you look to the right, and there's a boundary wall that goes down to the end, and then there's a boundary wall. It's on the other side of the Prasadam pavilion for Food for Life, etc. And then on the other side of that boundary wall is another Gaudiya Math temple. And during Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time, it was known as the House of Nandanacharya. Very special place. Along the wall that's facing our Mayapur property there are 3 panels of murals showing different pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where it was a hiding place. When Lord Nityananda came, he hid there. When Advaita Acharya wanted to test and require Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to show his omniscience, he hid there. And Nandanacharya was a cooperating party to those 2 situations. Another time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to hide there, having to do with some exchange with Advaita Acharya. So he went and jumped in the Ganga, and Nityananda and Haridas pulled him out of the Ganga. And then he told them, don't tell anybody I'm going to the house of Nandanacharya. And then after Advaita Acharya became terribly disturbed, I've offended Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he's gone away, and he was like smashed. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sent Srivas. Srivas, go tell Advaita Acharya where I'm hiding. So Advaita Acharya came. So that's house of Nandanacharya. During Bhaktisiddhanta's time, it became a Gaudiya Math. That was the Acharya in charge of the Gaudiya Math at that time was Madhva Maharaj. And Madhava Maharaj was being visited one time by Yasomati Nandana. Many of you know Yasomati Nandana, a very wonderful disciple of Prabhupada. He started the Hare Krishna movement here in America, and he was from Gujarat, so he eventually became, a leader in the whole of Gujarat and established a temple in Ahmedabad, etc. So one time, Yasomati Nandana told me this story. He was visiting Madhav Maharaj, and there was some appreciation of the wonderful work that Prabhupada had done. However, he made a remark, Madhava Maharaj. Yes, your Swamiji was very good because prior to his becoming a disciple, he was a good businessman. So he used his good business skill to establish a worldwide Hare Krishna movement. And Yaso exploded. Anybody that knows Yaso, he didn't take stuff like that. He said, he chastised him severely and said, how can you say like this? We must know in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's not possible by some business acumen to be able to spread Krishna consciousness. It's by Krishna Shakti. And he chastised him. He's a sannyasi and a superior, but he can't speak things like that. So he left. And he went directly, Yaso told me, he went directly to visit Prabhupada and told Prabhupada that what the exchange was. Prabhupada acknowledged they are envious. And from that time, there was another incident connected with the Chaitanya Math. Prabhupada forbid us to go to those places and to read the books because they were editing Bhaktisiddhanta's books to match their criticism of Bhaktisiddhanta. Very painful to say it even. So we should be careful where we're hearing from, and we should become knowledgeable in what the Scriptures says so we can speak from the Scriptures in case some circumstance arises that's a misunderstanding. But so now back to the Vibhuti topic. The being able to spread Krishna consciousness is a Vibhuti. The being able to bring people to the position of happiness is a Vibhuti. And it's directly from Krishna. That's what's being, I'm expanding on the idea, but that's what's being said here. Because somehow or other, Prajapati Daksha has aligned his desire with Vishnu's desire, he's now going to be acknowledged as having the capacity to bring that happiness into the world. Although the path of that happiness into this world is bringing living entities into material bodies where they suffer. So having material body alone is not sufficient. Having a human form of life is not sufficient. Having knowledge is not sufficient. Having the mercy of the Supreme Lord that comes through his dear devotees, that's the necessary beginning, and then internalizing that understanding and living accordingly. Then one is eligible for the real purpose of creation. And specifically also the mission of human life. How many times, many times, Prabhupada referred to the statement made by Prahlad to his father, Na te vidu svartakatimi Vishnu sva arta. Sva arta means one's self-interest. Na te vidu, they don't know. They're sva-arta, the aim of life. This is how Prabhupada translates it. The aim of life is Vishnu. The aim of life is Vishnu. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is attaining that connection, and the connection is through serving. That's the purpose of creation. To align oneself with that. And to deliver that, not just creating offspring. All forms of life can create offspring, no problem. It's not a glorious thing. Awakening Krishna consciousness, that's the glorious thing. And one can do it through offspring, and one can do it through so many different channels, but that's the glorious thing. And it's an empowerment. It's not something we do, it's something we can be an instrument of if Krishna so chooses to give us that capacity. That's the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Just one final thing I'd like to say. Embedded in the purport is something that Bhaktivinoda Thakur consistently used to describe the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So many of you know. The teachings of Lord Chaitanya, he characterized as 10 essential teachings. He called it Dasamula Tattva. Dasamula Tattva. And the first of those 10 essential teachings is the basis and support of the other 9. And that is Scripture, or he calls it Amnaya, or the Vedas, or Shruti, or Shruti Praman, Shabda Praman, any one of those terms works. That's the basis and foundation for everything, for knowing anything. It's the essential source of truth or knowledge about anything. And then the anythings is 9 more, and 7 of those 9 are just in the category of Sambandha Gyan, and then Abhidheya Gyan and Prayojana Gyan, and that's the 10. So of those 10 essential teachings, there's 2. Some living entities are conditioned, some living entities become liberated. That's 5 and 6 of the list of Sambandha Gyan. So in this verse, there's Nitya Baddha and there's Nitya Siddha. So the Nitya Baddha are people who would say no. They come to this world, eventually come to the human form of life, and if the opportunity is presented to take shelter of the personality of Godhead, the answer is no. And what brings them is no. And Nitya Baddha. And then there are those that say yes, of course, in differing degrees. One can say yes in differing degrees. But that's the means of achieving going beyond the cycle of birth and death. The purpose of creation is achieved. And I'm going to end with this. In Bhakti Vinod Thakur's commentary on that particular teaching, that Mula Tattva of Mahaprabhu, he says, Mahaprabhu taught there are three main things. You've probably heard this before. I'm sharing because I appreciated that's the source. Jivadaya, Namaruchi, Vaishnav Seva. Jivadaya, Namaruchi, Vaishnav Seva. It's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary on how the purpose of life can be fulfilled. Now, it's not just if one isn't spiritually connected or connected with the disciplic succession. Jivadaya can take all kinds of shapes. Philanthropy and altruism and so many things of this world. And it stays of this world. But when it's directed to reminding people of the mission of creation, the mission of human life within creation, according to one's capacity, doing that, that's Jivadaya. Jivadaya means reminding people of what they have forgotten. What have we forgotten? We forgot who we are. We forgot our relationship with Krishna. We forgot the natural state of love for Krishna. That's ours, but we've forgotten. And Jivadaya means reminding people of what they've forgotten. Namaruchi, we all know that one, in principle at least. From experience, it's another thing. Developing a taste. There's obstacles. Because of our jaundiced condition, we don't have a taste. But then we continue to follow the process. It cures the disease. And some taste can be made available in the healthy condition, Namaruchi. And Vaishnav Seva. Very fundamental. Here's a little sharing. During the time of Jiva Goswami, Emperor Akbar was the leading Mughal ruler in the whole of the area of Braj, and much larger area than Braj. You can say, I don't know what the boundaries were, but UP. And Akbar, by his broad-mindedness, and he personally visited Vrindavan and heard from Jiva Goswami, and he became a lover of the writings of the Goswamis, so much so that Emperor Akbar built, he out of his own treasury, he arranged for a library that would house the literature of the Goswamis and engage Brahmanas in making copies of the literatures of the Goswamis. So in Urdu, Rupa Goswami made an engraved plaque or something, a stone, in Urdu, honoring Akbar. They had like a very wonderful relationship. And that, he's a Vaishnav. And he's a protector of the Vaishnavas. And that plaque is no longer where it was placed because it took a long time to get this information. The library of Jiva Goswami, the library of the writings of the six Goswamis, was at the Radha Damodar temple. And over the generations, the library was not protected because there's just leaves. So decision was made by one of the acharyas in the Radha Damodar temple about 4 generations before us to give those copies, original copies of the Goswami literature to the Vrindavan Research Institute. And along with the copies went that Urdu plaque or inscription. One other is he wrote a very similar set of prayers to Govinda. As you know, the Govinda Dev deity was found by Rupa Goswami, and in the service of Akbar, Raj Man Singh donated the money to build the 7-story Govindaji temple. And the king donated the land because everything's under the ownership of the king. And he donated the land. And additional, he donated some agricultural land that's now the property of the deity to maintain the deity. So going into the future, the deity wouldn't have any difficulty. Jiva Goswami wrote an Ashtakam in glorification of Govinda Dev, so Govindashtakam, and it was chiseled in stone inside the main assembly hall of the Govinda temple, and it's still there. Someone from the Vrindavan Research Institute directed a devotee who took a picture of it, the inscription that says specifically about Akbar, that he was a Vaishnav. A great Vaishnav that protected the Vaishnavas of his time. Now that's a vibhuti. I'm telling this because he's from a different tradition altogether, but by his broad-mindedness and by the influence of Jiva Goswami explicitly twice in stone is indicating he was a Vaishnav. He didn't give up what he was. Yet he had great affection, love, and, he put his money where his mouth is. He gave his support, financial and otherwise, to the Vaishnavas. And thus his kingdom flourished. Aurangzeb was just the opposite, and his kingdom imploded. But the whole point here is not tradition specific, but the principle of having great faith in the glories of the personality of Godhead, encouraging the propagation of the glories of the personality of Godhead can be done by anyone. And to do that requires a vibhuti or an empowerment or a Krishna Shakti. And how is that Krishna Shakti best awakened is the association of a sadhu. Okay, looking at the clock there, it's 8:30. Any discussion? In the back? Go ahead. I can't hear you. Yes. In my language, it's Daksha Part 2. He was born again. It says specifically in one purport. He died, Daksha Part 1, he died out of embarrassment by having a goat's head. Because he was previously beautiful features. And he died out of embarrassment and took birth as Daksha Part 2. Do you have that portable microphone? He'll look for it. Now, can you speak loud?
We can acquire that surrender all the way up to the end of our life, can't we?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
we would pass.
Well, you have to go beyond the wall. The wall is our holding on to independence, and I'm the doer, and the whole false ego thing. Even for spiritually minded persons, that's still residually there. So one has to come to that stage, but surrender is up to that point. Yeah. Well, that's not necessarily true at all. It may be for some people, may not be for many people. Your last breath doesn't guarantee anything. It's the mood. I mean, the reality of death is heavy. The pain is also heavy. It's not easy when one is in enormous pain to go there. It may help. It may hinder. Well, it depends. Some persons just become absorbed in pain and want mitigation of the pain.
Regarding at the end of the cosmic world where Brahma sets everything back in.
Vishnu brings everything in, not Brahma. Brahma leaves his body and goes somewhere, depending different destinations, depending. And he's one of the living entities, and there's so many living entities. And all those living entities are withdrawn within the body of Mahavishnu, not within the body of Brahma. Yes. Not Krishna, Vishnu. Vishnu, the time comes, the time factor is moving, where it's a prompt, time for creation.
Okay. And then does that come out like it has in the past?
Yes, it's cyclical. Yes. Same thing over and over and over in cycles. Just like summer, fall, winter, spring. Time moves in cycles. Day and night moves in cycles. Vibhuti? Yeah.
Is that a short version of
Well, it's a different application of the same Sanskrit root. Vibhu means great, and vibhuti is an opulence of the great. The vibhuti means opulence, and the opulence of vibhu. So it's grammatically not an opulence. It's the source of the opulence is vibhu, and the vibhuti is the opulence from vibhu. It's just grammar. Yeah. Yeah. Vibhu is the source of vibhutis. The source of opulence and the opulence of vibhu is vibhuti. And that's chapter 10. In English, it's opulences of the absolute, right? Chapter 10, Bhagavad Gita. And then the list, in Sanskrit, it's Vibhuti Yoga. And what's a Vibhuti? It's an opulence of the Supreme manifest in this world. A partial opulence of the Supreme is manifest in this world. That's what a Vibhuti is. You find it? Remote? No. Okay. You just turn the button on. Try it. Okay. You have a question? You have a question? Someone has a question.
So with speed, we had one person first is It is correct to say or think as follows. Lord Krishna is all knowing. Is it possible that because the Paramatma does not exist in the spiritual world, he can be surprised by our knowledge?
Do you understand the question? I don't understand the question. Krishna is all-knowing, yes. And so then there's this suggestion or conjecture.
Is it possible that because the Paramatma does not exist in the spiritual world?
It's true that Paramatma does exist in the spiritual world as Bhagavan. And Bhagavan is all-knowing as Paramatma is all-knowing.
He can be surprised by our knowledge.
Yeah, sure. Yes, he can.
And second one, in other words, it is possible that a soul in the Vaikuntha or Vrindavan can do something for Krishna without him knowing it ahead of time.
No. I mean, all-knowing is all-knowing. It's not like not knowing and then all-knowing. All-knowing is past, present, future.
The last question we have. Is Daksha desire considered material?
We discussed this yesterday. It's a puzzle. The puzzle message yesterday was, here's a pan scale. Over on this side is he's totally aligned with Vishnu's desire. Over on the other side of the pan scale, he offends Narada. Now that's not the behavior of one who is completely aligned with Vishnu. So when we discussed this yesterday, one possible consideration is this bad behavior, this sudurachar of Daksha was circumstantial only. Like Bhagavad Gita 9:30, where Krishna says, if someone that's bhajate mam ananya bhak, they're my undivided devotee, and they do some sudurachar, it says circumstantial, and Krishna corrects it. That's the next verse, 31. That's one way to explain. Another way to explain is, he was almost there but not there. Meaning he still has some residual pride. The same as Daksha Part 1 was proud of his performing so many yagyas, etc., etc. And on that basis he offended Lord Shiva. Now he's offending Narada. The same pride was there. So he wasn't fully pure yet. But Vishnu was being kind upon him because to a degree, Daksha wanted that which Vishnu wanted, so he said some nice things, and he gave him a qualified wife to help him achieve that purpose. And I've not read anything by our acharyas to say whether it's this or that, or maybe a third possibility. So if anybody out there in our listening audience has, from our acharyas, some specific declaration, that would be nice. That's it?
We have more questions right now. So how to understand our independence if we completely submit to Krishna's will?
That's an independent choice. That's how we understand our independence. You can choose not to. You can choose to. You can choose to go 30%, 50%, 80%. That's a free will choice. It may take some time and purification to get there, but it's a free will choice. And free will choices require mercy. Without mercy, we're not going to get there. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. We're done.